Y'all excited to be here tonight? Nobody's fallen asleep on me yet? We have had some powerful words come from this microphone tonight. Amen? Amen. I just hope that I can rise to somewhat of that level. I want y'all to say this with me. When God calls me, God equips me. When God calls me, God reminds me. My dad called me earlier this week and he said, Amigo, he said, what are you going to be talking about this weekend up at Explorations? I said, well, Dad, I'm talking about my call story. He's like, really? He's like, well, how were you called? I'm like, thanks a lot, Dad, you know. And I went on to tell him, I said, the summer of my 8th grade year, right? I was 14 years old, up in Sacramento, New Mexico, at the, oh yeah, all right. Yes, yes, at the Rio Grande Annual Conference Youth Assembly, right? And I remember being there, and I remember the pastor, the speaker for the week, said, if you're feeling a call to ministry, I invite you to accept it tonight. So I was telling my dad this story. He's like, wow, I mean, that's impressive, you know, he's like, how did you know God was calling you? I was like, wow. I said, well, and the only thing I could think of, I said, you know, Dad, I remember that I did probably a very childish thing, but I think also a very faithful thing. I said, God, give me a sign. Y'all ever been there before? So all I remember was closing my eyes and praying, God, give me a sign. And all of a sudden, a wind came rushing through the building. And the hairs on my arm stood up, and I knew that God was calling me. And then he said, and then what did you do? I said, then I talked to you. My dad, I love him, Reverend Reuben Sines Jr., for those of you who may know him. I went on after my 8th grade year, after receiving the call, and led a mediocre high school life, right? Mediocre. I was mediocre at every single thing I did. I was mediocre at wrestling. Actually, I was horrible at wrestling. I never won a match, seriously. And I had to wear those tight singlet things, they're nasty. Amen. I was mediocre at ROTC, JROTC. I was mediocre at football, but I had a dream. Not to wrestle. And I was just kind of mediocre, you know. I didn't serve on any DCYM boards or CCYM. I wasn't even the president of my church youth group because they're all girls and they conspired against me and didn't let me be president. That's true. I'm not even lying. I believe it. But you know, it taught me my first ministry lesson. It taught me that no matter how hard you prepare, right, you're never going to be appreciated. It's true, amen, from anybody that's been in ministry for a while. But it's worth it. It's worth it. So then I went off to college to go run track. What? For real? No, seriously, I went off to go try to fulfill my dream and play football, right? And so, not track. And my college years, I won't go into great detail, but I'll spare you the details, but it's what I call my prodigal years. Maybe some of y'all experienced the prodigal years in here. Anybody? Still am. Amen. Maybe you know what I'm talking about. You know, where you run from family, you run from God, you squander everything. Y'all ever been there before? Maybe. I guess I'm talking to a holy sainthood here this evening. But I experienced a prodigal journey during that time. I kept running and so forth, and all this time I knew how to call to ministry. I was so stoked, I was so driven to have this prodigal journey that I actually made a trip one December from my parents' house in the valley of South Texas out to West Texas at Sul State University. And that day, for some reason, odd reason, in South Texas, there happened to be an ice storm out in Del Rio, that area. And as I passed Sanderson on my way up Highway 90 to the mountains of Texas, and yes, we do have mountains in Texas, right? It's just West Texas. Yes. As I was going up there, the roads were so slicked over that I lost control of my truck, skid across the side of the highway, ran over about 20 yards worth of brush and so forth, and the only thing that kept my truck from turning over down the embankment was that a branch had wrapped up in my axle. So I opened up the door and I rolled out and made it back up to the highway. And I'll never forget, because two 18-wheelers stopped on the highway. They couldn't stop right away because it was icy. And two of them stopped by. And one man gets out of the truck and he tells me in Spanish, but he says, "Don't worry, your truck is material. God has a plan for your life. God has a plan for your life." And so began my reminding stage. I went back that semester. I squandered some more still. And then that summer, something really cool happened to me. I got a job at a dude ranch. I rode a horse every day for a full summer. Those horses were like, bam, they're buff, right? Big. And a cool opportunity happened for me that started to call me back. We had this thing called Hitch and Post, right? And it was every single morning we had devotional and prayer time. And someone said, "You know what, Aaron, I think you should lead it because you're good at that." And God reminded me again of my call. So after that wonderful experience up in the mountains again, the mountains and me have a good history, right? Came back to the valley in South Texas. That's what we call it, by the way, the valley. And I started to get involved in the church. My dad and my church started to nurture my gifts and my talents, and began in youth ministry and started to grow that youth ministry. I remember at the end of one youth service, this woman who I always thought was crazy. You have any crazy people in your churches? Don't point to anybody in here, all right? I thought this woman was crazy, but this woman stopped me after service, and she says, "Aaron Gabriel," Aaron Gabriel. And that's usually when I get in trouble, that's what, Aaron Gabriel, when I was in trouble. It's in Spanish, right? I said, "Yeah." She says, "God told me to find Aaron Gabriel and tell him that he's calling you into the ministry." I still thought the lady was crazy. But as I look back, God was reminding me again.